Hello, in this video I'm going to discuss inverse function. And as I have said on my previous video, this PowerPoint presentation is already uploaded on my website www.paulgeraldsantos.pb.com. For our objectives, we have to determine the inverse of a one-to-one function, and we must represent an inverse function through its table of values and graph. And the third one, we must find the domain and range of an inverse function. Okay, to define an inverse of a function, if f is a one-to-one function, then the inverse of f, denoted by that symbol, it seems to be f raised to negative 1, is the function formed by reversing all the ordered pairs in f. Thus, we have this inverse of f contains yx, such that the ordered pair xy is in the function f, one-to-one function f. We'll just interchange the x and y in our one-to-one function. So if f is not one-to-one, then f does not have an inverse. Or we can also say that the inverse does not exist. There are some properties of inverse function. The first one is, okay, if it exists, no, the inverse exists. The inverse of a one-to-one function is also one-to-one. So that is the first one. So the second one is the domain of the inverse is the range of the function, the original function. And the range of the inverse function is the domain of the function. Okay, so this is the second example on our last video. And we all know that this one is a one-to-one function. Does it have an inverse? Yes, there is. Okay, how to find an inverse function? So there are some steps. First is to determine if the function f is one-to-one. We already discussed this on our previous video on how to determine if the function f is one-to-one. Okay? Because if f is not one-to-one, therefore we do not need to perform the second up to the fifth steps. Okay? Because there are no inverse of f. So if there is an inverse, in the equation for f of x, replace f of x by y. Okay, very easy. Replace f of x by y. As simple as that. So that is the second step. Third step is to interchange the roles of x and y. This part is, yes, it is very easy. You're just going to switch their place. Okay? And solve for y. Now, this is the tricky part because it requires your knowledge in algebraic manipulation. Solving for y. And then after you solve for y, we must replace y by inverse function of f of x in the new equation, because the resulting y here is not the original y, it is the inverse of f of x. And we must find the domain and range of the inverse by finding the range in the domain of the original function, because that property tells us that the domain of the function is the range of the inverse. The range of the function is the domain of the inverse. So, if f of x equals 2x plus 1, what is the inverse function of f of x? So, I will go directly to step 2 because we already proved that f of x equals 2x plus 1 is a one-to-one function. So, I replace f of x by y. Step number 3. I interchange or switch place x and y. Then solve for y. subtract, subtract both sides by 1, we have x minus 1 equals to y. And then divide both sides by 2, we have x minus 1 all over 2 is equal to y, or y equals x minus 1 all over 2. Okay, for our step number 4, we will replace y by the inverse function notation. Okay, inverse function of f of x. That will be equal to x minus 1 all over 2. So this will be the inverse function of f of x equals 2x plus 1. For our step number 5, we all know that the domain of f of x is the set of all real numbers because it is a linear function. Therefore, based on the property, the range of the inverse is the set of all real numbers. Now, the domain of the inverse is also the set of all real numbers. The reason is because the range of the function is the set of all real numbers. If we are to recall, the range of the function is the domain of the inverse based on the property that I have presented a while ago. So, these are the steps in finding the inverse function. Now, to represent the function and its inverse through its table of values in graph, okay, so I assign values for x and then solve for y, or solve for f of x or inverse function of f of x. So for 0, we have 1, for 1 we have 3, for 2 we have 5, for 3 we have 7, for 4 we have 9. For the inverse, for 0 we have negative 1 half, for 1 we have 0, for 2 we have 1 half, for 3 we have 1, and for 4 we have 3 halves. And if you're going to graph that, okay, so the blue or the line with blue dots is the function, while the line with the red dots is the inverse of the function. So that is how it looks like. By the way, I use graphing software to graph so that I can show you clearer what or how does it look like. And this will be your perhaps exercise for this week, practice exercise, maybe on our synchronous meeting perhaps. And by the way, if you new to this channel, don't forget to click the like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe to my channel so that you will be updated to our next video. Thank you for listening.